Okay, I would like to welcome everyone to the speaker series. This is a speaker series event with the Irish Stammering Association. We are most welcome to have this speaker join us for this event. I would just like everyone to just welcome Eric S. Jackson just into the room here. I would just like to just read a short bio just of Eric just before I pass you um, on to. So Eric S. Jackson is a person who stutters. He's a speech language pathologist, associate professor, and director of the Stuttering and Variability Lab at NYU, where he conducts research on stuttering. So I would just like to welcome Eric to the Irish Stammering Association's speaker series. And I'll just pass you over there.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks everybody for coming. It's 7 there right now or 8? What is the time difference?
It is just 10 past 7 here now, Eric.
Okay, cool. Well, it is great to be here. Thank you. This is going to be extremely informal. I just want to put that out there. I'm completely okay if people jump in, and if I don't get past the first point that I'm making, if it leads to good discussion, I think that could be just as valuable as me sort of reviewing my research, which I'll do somewhat, but again, this is going to be super informal, and I hope that's okay. So I figured that I would talk about my background for a little bit first, and then just briefly talk about what I'm interested in scientifically, and just review a couple of publications and just sort of talk about what the findings have been. The publications that I chose, they do give a good idea of what my research program is and also kind of where it's going. And then I just wanted to like briefly talk, well, no, maybe not briefly, I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But I then wanted to talk about some more like therapy clinical directions that we're taking now, and really get your feedback on like whether you all think that these are interesting ideas to pursue. So I'd appreciate some feedback actually throughout the presentation, but particularly when we talk about those um, clinical or therapeutic directions. So I'm just going to stop my share for a second, just so I can see everybody a little bit more big. So in terms of my background, I'm a associate professor, as Stephen mentioned, at NYU. I've been a scientist focused on stuttering for, when did I grad? Well, no, I guess when I started my PhD, so like 13 years. I'm also a speech pathologist. I've been a speech pathologist for about 16 years. And I'm also a person who stutters. And I was very involved in the stuttering world in the aughts and into the tens. And I'm still involved. And I actually recently became somewhat more involved. I do a lot of work with the Friends organization, which is great. The conference is coming, the convention is coming up soon. Maybe I might see one of you there. But I first got into the work or this world, like the stuttering world, because I was in a real bad place with stuttering. Probably like many of you, I had therapy my entire life. And I had, in my mid-20s, I was like kind of at a really bad place with stuttering. I found a therapy that was actually pretty helpful for me, which was a first in my life. I was working in finance at the time, and I was like, oh, well, I don't like my job in finance. I feel like I could become a speech pathologist. And that's when I became a speech pathologist. I also I I started a support group in Brooklyn here in New York. I also started a podcast about stuttering called Stutter Talk with a couple of other people. That was a big part of my sort of early foray into the world and how I got to meet lots of people in the community. Um, the reason that I'm saying all this is because it has like tremendously my experience as a stutterer has tremendously impacted the work that I do. And I think the work that I do is somewhat unique, not totally unique, but somewhat unique because I went back to school to learn how to be a scientist, but all the questions that I ask are directly related to the experience of stuttering and particularly stuttering events. And I'll explain how in a second. Which you know, there are not many of us that are using like basic science techniques to study these really sort of experiential aspects of stuttering. Um, so I'm going to share my screen again. Like I said, I was going to highlight a couple of my papers, which I think give like a nice uh, little summary of how I think about stuttering. So hold on a second. There we go. So first, I just wanted to introduce like how I think of the research questions that I ask and also how I think of my practice. I still work as a speech language pathologist at NYU, but I also have a small private practice outside of NYU. My interests um, are in a lot of ways focused on stuttering events, right? Um, the problem on the surface, a problem with this um, could clearly be that, oh, well, I mean, if you're focusing on stuttering events, you're missing like most of stuttering, right? But from my perspective, the stuttering event happens before it gets to the surface. And I think we know a lot about this because some of the work that I've done and some others have done on anticipation. All right. But the fact that there's this real sort of experience of like, I don't know whether you want to call it a glitch or a breakdown, knowing that if you keep going, you're going to stutter. And I'm really interested in that time between intent, like when you know you want to say something, uh, and then when you actually speak, because as we all know, there's like so much that can happen within that time. And not a lot of researchers focus specifically on that time using advanced technology, really. So that's what I'm interested in. I'll go through some of my papers just really quickly right now. This one is not even a peer-reviewed paper, but it was the, wow, look at that picture too. So this is from 2011 or 12, something like that. Um, I, I was recently told that I look like a serial killer in this picture. I'm not sure that I necessarily agree with that, but yeah, it's not the greatest picture. Anyway, this was for an online conference for International Stuttering Awareness Day. Um, and uh, basically, the idea here is what I said before. We were sort of like I was in an extremely naive sort of way exploring like what a stuttering event actually is. Right. So the ideas that came up in this the ideas that came up in this paper were that no, there's like something that happens, whether it be at like a speech language planning level or neurological level, like there's some kind of glitch or something that happens prior to anybody seeing any signs of observable stuttering. And that's basically what the main idea was in this paper. And then all of my work to follow, again, this wasn't a peer-reviewed paper, but it did sort of represent how I was thinking about stuttering at the time and how I still do think about stuttering. So then, like, naturally, because I was interested in this window, like prior to actual speech, I became very interested in the idea of anticipation. We could even call it the phenomenon of anticipation, right? Everybody knows what this is. Stutterers at least know what this is. I don't think I necessarily have to explain what anticipation is. But what came from this paper is that, yeah, no, the experience of anticipation is pervasive. All of the people who we spoke to report experiencing anticipation at least sometimes. Most of the people report experiencing anticipation often, which is extremely important, right? Because if that is happening, then that means that, yeah, well, the stutterer is experiencing something well before any kind of measure of over severity is going to be taken. And the reason that I became so interested in this is because, well, if that's the case, right, and speech pathologists, for example, are only basing their measurements on over stuttering, like whether there's a repetition, a block, or prolongation, or whatever, then there's this great underestimation of the magnitude or the severity or the extent of stuttering. And that's why I think it's like really important to develop ways to measure what is going on prior to speech getting into the surface. And then specifically what this paper sort of showed was that, like, again, it's not rocket science, but it needed to be documented in some way that we do a whole bunch of shit when we know that we're going to stutter in lots of cases to avoid stuttering from coming to the surface or try to disguise it or try to stall it, um, or prevent it in some other way, right? Which to me is effort, right? And again, not effort that is taken into account when lots of people think of stuttering. Okay. So then another problem in the stuttering literature is that, especially now, like lots of people aren't even focusing on stuttering anymore. All right. They're looking at what happens with stutterers, and particularly people who are interested in the brain, which is a large part of my research. They're looking at what happens in the brain when people who stutter are fluent. So when they're not stuttering. To me, this is crazy. There are some reasons for it, mainly that, well, a lot of times what happens when we go into those unnatural environments of a brain imaging machine, for example, stutterers don't stutter, right? So it's actually hard to reliably get people to stutter when we go into the lab. So we came up with this approach, and some other people have done this as well, where we could more reliably elicit stuttering in the lab. And that is like based on leveraging anticipation and the fact that stutterers often know well, like what words they're going to stutter, what words are problematic, what sounds are problematic, and the like, particularly in controlled settings. So we use this approach in a lot of studies where we're trying to look at like what is going on in the brain, what's that glitch that happens just prior to a moment of stuttering. right? Because if we can go backwards like that, then perhaps we could get better at like actually identifying stuttering events, because again, what comes out on the surface is clouded by all the things that we do to try not to stutter or to disguise it. All right. So then we did a series of studies where we were looking at the brain, and again trying to figure out, okay, well, what is it that is going on in the brain prior to a moment of stuttering? Like I said, not going to get into the details. They're not, well, I mean, one, we don't have time, but two, they're not really necessary for this kind of discussion. But what I will show you is that what we identified is that when stutterers anticipate, so when we anticipate stuttering in a controlled setting, like when we know we're going to stutter, there's this elevated activation in this one area of the brain called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex in the right hemisphere. So that area, without getting into it too much, it is responsible for lots of cognitive functions, right? Like things like attention or memory. So inhibition, things like that. So we came up with this hypothesis essentially that, okay, well, what we're seeing here during anticipation is like this hyperactive or heightened response when we know we're going to stutter compared to when we don't think we're going to stutter, right? It's almost like that system, which is part of what we call the cognitive control network. It's almost like that system is in like overdrive, right? Another way to think about it is it's like some kind of neural correlate of the oh shit. Like, well, yeah, I know if I proceed and if I know if I keep going, that what's going to come out at the end is stuttering. Okay. All right. That's enough for that. Then we did a similar study. So with that study, we used a technology that is similar to fMRI, where essentially what we're detecting is changes in blood flow concentration, but it's not so temporally precise. So in this next study, we used another brain imaging technology called magnetoencephalography, or MEG, which essentially uses magnetic fields to detect changes in electrical activity in the brain. And here we found that with a much more temporally precise estimation of what is happening in the brain, that we are still seeing this heightened response in the same region, right? So around the same region as we did in the previous paper, right? So it's just sort of more evidence that, okay, well, when a person knows that they're going to stutter, when stuttering is upcoming, this neural system almost like kicks into overdrive, right? Which is hypothesized to interfere with what we're doing when we're talking. We don't uh, think that this is what is triggering a stuttering event, but we think that it is something that is complicating what we do when we know that we're going to stutter, right? Which is going to make it harder to move through speech. I mean, whether you're a person who wants to use a speaking strategy or not, or just focus on what you're saying, right? This heightened response is something that gets in the way of us being able to do that. Okay. So if we go back to that kind of, so if we go back to that diagram, right? Like we have the intent to say something, right? And then there are all these complicated planning processes, not going to get into here, not going to get into them here, but they do happen, right? And then we say word. But what is important is that, yeah, but there are so many things that go into influencing that whole process that generally is really not paid any mind, particularly when it comes to neuroimaging research, right? These are things like situational factors, what we refer to as social cognition or interpersonal dynamics and situational factors. So one of my doc students right now, Courtney Luckman, she just had a paper published in which it was a qualitative study where essentially she analyzed what people are thinking during what stutterers are thinking during social interactions and what is making it hard for us to just get on with what we want to do, and that's just speak, right? And she found things like, which probably resonate with everybody here, increased time pressure, the dynamic of the relationship, like if it's somebody, for example, who has some authority over you, right? And there are a host of other factors that kind of make the social setting that prime the system to make it more likely that we're going to experience difficulty, right? That's something that happens here, like likely before we even go to say the word, right? And then somewhere along this process here, now we're finding evidence, like I showed from those last two papers, that yeah, something in the brain in that right hemisphere cognitive control region is also going quote awry. It's going into overdrive. It's doing something different. It's increasing effort. It's making us work harder, right? And that stuff reflects this kind of responding to anticipated difficulty, right? Because when we know that we're going to stutter on a word, like, and it's not even always conscious, right? But we do a lot of different things, perhaps not after like being involved in support and self-help, which is one of the great things about support and self-help, right? Is that it does sort of lessen the extent to which we anticipate by just becoming more comfortable with stuttering. I sure would say, by the way, something that I didn't say in the beginning was that for me, one of the most helpful things that I found in my sort of journey and my experience uh, dealing with stuttering was learning to accept myself as a person who stutters and learning to become more comfortable in moments of stuttering, right? That definitely had the greatest impact. And then at some point later down the road, I learned a little more about speaking strategies and things, and I think that those can be helpful sometime, right? But this idea of learning to become comfortable in a moment of stuttering was, for me personally, by far the most impactful um, uh, uh, thing in my journey. And this neural response, right? Like what what we're thinking now is that, well, if we had some kind of way to lessen this heightened cognitive control response, like lessen the concern or the anxiety or all the things that we think we need to do in order to not, I don't know, stutter as intensely, right? If there was some way that we could help with that, in addition to what we're currently doing, which is working on accepting yourself as a person who stutters and desensitizing and becoming more comfortable with moments of stuttering, then that'd be a helpful thing, right? So we're specifically there talking about like mitigating the anticipatory response. So we're just going on to either stutter and just stutter openly and stutter with less tension, or if for those of us who want to use a speaking strategy when we know, right? But the idea being with that heightened cognitive response, it makes it harder to do anything, right? It makes it harder to move through and do anything. So, um, actually, before I get into these, does does anybody have any questions or any thoughts at this point?
Eric, would it be okay if I just asked you? So, have you been able to? Because I was just thinking what you were saying there. So, actually, just as a person's journey is maybe moving to acceptance, have you been able to study a person over time? And then, is there any difference when it comes to the anticipatory nature of their kind of stuttering as they maybe journey to that level of acceptance? Or is there any difference in the brain imagery when you see maybe move towards acceptance?
That's a good question. We haven't had any longitudinal studies where we've studied individual people. And it's actually also really hard to use brain imaging to study individual people where
Oh,
we are kind of getting better at doing that. And actually this technology that I talked about, functional near infrared spectroscopy, there is some potential there in to be able to study people individually like that. But really mostly with the brain imaging studies, the results that we are getting now are like at a group level, and it's just an average of a bunch of people. That said, though, right, like the kind of study that you're talking about could still be done in that, like, you could set up a study that is longitudinal in nature and people come in over time, maybe when they're like particularly going through acceptance or desensitization or non-avoidance type therapies and seeing if there are changes at the group level compared to a group that is not doing
yeah.
that. I mean, it's a good idea for a study, Stephen. So
Okay. Good.
let's think of putting an application together for some funding, which is
Cool.
so easy to get in the States right now. I,
Okay.
no, no, I'm being sarcastic about
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. No,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Right.
totally get that.
Could I just ask a couple of things, Eric?
Yeah.
There's so are there so what you seem to be discussing is the issues that arise due to, I suppose, over anticipation or anxiety, before someone speaks. And just a couple of things. Um, we have the old wise saying that we should think before we talk,
Yeah.
regardless of a stammer or that. So there must be some advantages in the anticipation phase as well. And I just wonder, have you compared um, what a non-stammering person goes through in anticipation compared to someone who stammers?
What would so it's a great question. I just want to ask one clarifying question. What would anticipation be in a non-stuttering person is what we would need to establish.
Yeah, sort of. So I think lots of things. Um, I think someone would be afraid that they would say something stupid, that they might inadvertently insult somebody, that they'd use a word the wrong way, so there could be a lot of social anxiety, and I don't know what the other words for it were, but um, so that someone would speak up and suddenly appear stupid, or
Yeah.
something like that, so there can
Yeah.
be a lot of I find in talking about stammering a lot that a lot of the issues we tend to have aren't necessarily unique to people who stammer. but they're part of the human makeup, if you like, So the anticipatory side of it, I just wonder, is it a big deal, if you like, for people who don't stammer as well?
Yeah, no, so I do think it's a great question. And I also agree with you that I think, like, by itself, anticipation is this, I would think that it is very similar in stutterers and non-stutterers in terms of the basic mechanisms of anticipation, right? I would make the case that, well, yeah, but anticipation probably happens a lot more in stutterers, one.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
interesting though, like one of my close collaborators, Joan Orpea, um, so he's a Spanish speaker, a native Spanish speaker. And like he recently got interested in he's a great scientist. He's a great neuroscientist, cognitive neuroscientist, and recently became interested in stuttering research. And over the past 5 years or so, we've been working a lot together. And for him, like when I would describe the anticipation associated with a stuttering event, he would say, "Well, yeah, like if I don't know exactly what the right word is, or if I don't like, I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying this, but he would characterize himself as somewhat an anxious person, right? And he's like if I don't want to say the wrong thing, he would say, well, yeah, like it sounds like a lot of the stuff you are talking about is like extremely or can be extremely similar for second language speakers like that. So there have not been any studies that compares, if you will, like anticipatory mechanisms in, for example, second language learners and
Mm.
stutterers. Um, I think the interesting part to me, though, about anticipation and stuttering, and why I do think it's unique, is based in the response, right? Like it's not so much anticipation. Like if I had to explain what the basic mechanism of anticipation is, right? People make these associations with moments of stuttering, probably negative reactions in early
Yeah.
childhood or some form of judgment, right? And then like these sort of long-term memory tracers are formed, and then there's anticipation, and it's more likely that a person will anticipate when those are there. But what's interesting to me and what I focus on is, okay, well, but then what does the person do when they anticipate and they know that they need to move forward, right? And for stutterers, like we develop so many tricks that like seem to be specific to stuttering in the sense that like if we were comparing for, for example, a second language learner and a stutterer in a tightly controlled study where everything else is the same, right? Um, with stuttering, like the person knows exactly what they want to say, right? It's just that intermittently our body is not going to allow us to do it. So we develop like all of these sort of like stalling, compensatory strategies that are going to get us to at some point where the stuttering moment just sort of passes. In a second language learner, like I I mean, I I think that it might be somewhat different because it's not that the person like knows necessarily exactly what they want to say, but it's more like an uncertainty about what to say. So I think that that'd be
Mm.
somewhat different, right?
Yeah.
Particularly when you're looking in terms of like, okay, well, what is the person doing though? Now, in response to anticipated difficulty. Now, like that said, I mean, I'm sure that a person who wasn't sure of what word to say might also engage or like develop a host of compensatory strategies that may or may not be similar to what we do as people who stutter. So all of that to say is that it's an open question and it's a good one, and that should be an area of future study.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. Anybody else?
Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Eric. Hi there.
Hi.
Yeah,
I
so
can't see you, but I can hear you.
sorry, I'm in my robe. I'm comfortable at home
Okay.
after work. So I was like, I don't think you guys want to see me in my robe.
Oh,
But
wait. I think we found our first person that might have a cocktail with them. Is that or
definitely
no?
not a
Oh,
cocktail.
okay. Okay.
More like a frappuccino.
Okay. Yeah. At night.
Yeah.
Okay.
So first of all, hi. So my name is Shanaz Kasim. So I'm 28 years old, okay? And so I'm originally from Zimbabwe, but I moved to Ireland at the age of 3, right? And it's so interesting because I developed my stutter after we had moved to Ireland. And it was so interesting because it got so bad, like really, really bad. And and when you're speaking about the anticipation before speaking, right? Like that feeling and of what's happening before you actually speak, right? I got that so much. And oh my goodness, it was so intense. Like I couldn't speak 2 words without stuttering. Like it was insane, and it really affected me in primary school, in secondary school also, and in college. It was just so intense. And I guess, sorry, this is not really a question, but it's just more or less like just to reflect on like the experience and how I've gotten to where I am today you know and yeah, and so I did go to speech therapy. That's how bad it was. Um but personally, I didn't see the therapist that I had, right? She basically asked me to just read. Every session I had, she would get me to read. And I was like, oh, this is not really helping. I'm like, why am I like reading stories here? You know? And then it was only maybe like a couple of years later when I realized that, oh, that's what she was trying to do. She was trying to get me to read slowly, take each word at a time. And then it got to a stage where I was like, okay, if I want a future, if I want to actually have a future and be able to speak and because it was really bad, like I couldn't do anything, like it was so frustrating. And I said to myself, well, because I'm a very chatty person, right? And so many times people were finishing my sentences for me. That bothered me a lot. That was really degrading, and it felt awful because you're trying to speak, you're trying to get something out, and people are just, people are losing interest halfway through. Oh my goodness, it's just awful, right? So I said to myself, well, look, I have one option here. I can either help myself or I can just let this take over my life. So what I did then was my first job, when I finished college, I think it was about 19 or 20 there. My first job was a front desk receptionist. And so you can imagine, yeah, a person at reception that stutters.
I love that.
It was
All people
insane.
at reception desks should be people with some kind
Yeah.
of communication thing going.
Yeah.
I think because it would make people
Yeah.
much more patient,
Yeah.
Mm.
Oh,
generally
definitely.
speaking,
Yeah.
in life. Yeah.
Yeah. It was challenging
I
at
love
first.
that though, by the way. Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was challenging, but I said
Oh, my
to
dog
myself,
loves it too. She just
yeah.
groaned right there. Yeah, yeah. So that was her showing that she thinks it's amazing as well.
Yeah, oh, it was just, yeah. So, like I said, I put myself in an uncomfortable situation in order to somehow gain control of my stutter. And it worked in the long run for me because I can speak today. I can actually speak very well. Like there are even like most days where I'll speak and I won't feel anything, you know? And it like it's so good to the point where now I'll meet like a new person, like for example, I just started a new job there a month ago, and none of them I've even noticed yet. So I was like, oh, this is great. So I worked so hard in trying to speak. So what I do is I basically like I take each word at a time. I speak slowly, and when I feel something coming on, I'll either pause or I'll speak slower. Or if it's really strong and I can't get rid of it, sometimes I have to change the word, if that makes sense. I have to change. So, like, let's say if I'm about to say sugar or something, I'll replace it with something else that's similar to it, just in order to gain control of my stutter. It's so funny. Like sometimes I'll just be laughing at myself, saying, "Geez, like, oh, To be honest, like it is an everyday struggle. Well, I wouldn't say struggle, but I mean, yeah, like it is an everyday thing, and you're constantly thinking, and you're constantly like, you know, um thinking of what to say or how to say it. So yeah, it's been quite a journey, I won't lie.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, like all these uh, rate control is a really interesting thing. I don't know how many people here have been in speech therapy or have like done stuff like that, because it is one of the most hated like potential strategies for us to use. Uh, because in a lot of ways, like we learn speech, people are speaking around us in a certain way with a certain speed. People in the interaction count on us, and it builds that sort of pressure, like, oh, well, we need you. And then slowing it down intentionally, like, is just something that is, I, I, I just find it's hated by so many stutterers. I certainly hated it in therapy, but it was also like the way I was doing it, right? And the way that I was first introduced to reducing my rate was like that whole sort of fluency shaping, stretching every word out, sounding sort of robotic and stuff like that. It's funny because there's no like there is something to the fact that, well, given enough time, a person who stutters can say any word without struggle, right? But that amount of time is what the difficult sort of variable is. So um to me, like when I say desensitization, like certainly I refer to desensitization with getting comfortable with just letting stuttering out and openly stuttering, but also desensitizing to if a person like does want to use speaking strategies like specifically rate control or like uh, other kinds of strategies like forward moving speech or stuttering modification or whatever it is, um, can be super helpful, right? So, and I think we all sort of find our own kind of like, well, yeah, like I could do that, I could put up with that. Um, Yeah, I know a lot of people that like do rely on switching words and things. I personally, like a big part of my own therapy was like this whole non-avoidance thing. And for like the first couple of years after I really started to change my relationship with stuttering, it was like complete non-avoidance. And I just tried my hardest because that made me feel good to never use an avoidance. It was a bit extreme, um, but for me, it was super helpful and it kind of made me accept myself or help me accept myself a little bit more so, right? It didn't like perpetuate shame that I was feeling about stuttering at the time for hiding and avoiding and things like that. I'm not sure how I exactly got on that, but I mean, I love it. So, um, yeah. Wait, so what time are we going until, Stephen?
So yeah, well, we were due to finish at 8 p.m., but like we can go on till whenever you need, Eric. Anyway, so we could, because we didn't start until about 7:10, so we have 8:10 anyway. Is
I'll just briefly I'll just briefly say so in terms of like therapeutic applications, some of the things that we're working on right now, just really quickly and
yeah,
why. Like, so this idea that there does seem to be this heightened neural response that seems to be related to like an avoidance like or like hypercognitive control response when we think we're going to have difficulty. There are some methods out there now that may have some application with stuttering. So transcranial direct current stimulation, or TDCS. Has anybody heard of that in this room? And no. Okay. Like, I just want to make clear too, I'm not promoting the use of any of these. Like, this is purely for research at this point. There have been a bunch of TDCS studies, although not much has come from them, but there are some possibilities. Particularly, I'm interested in something like it. Basically, what the strategy does is it sends a little electric current, a very weak electric current into the brain, with the hopes of modulating neural activity in that particular region or in a region that's connected to that particular region. So what we're thinking is, okay, well, if we have this hyperactive response in this particular area in the right hemisphere that seems to be related to an excessive or hyper cognitive response related to things like anticipation, um, or anxiety even, well, then maybe we could inhibit that response by providing this electrical stimulation. And that's sort of one of the projects that we recently started here in my lab. And then there's also, we just got some funding actually a little while ago now, to investigate the impact. And I'm definitely not encouraging the use of psilocybin yet, but what I will say is that we got some money to do a study that investigates the impact of psilocybin, or magic mushrooms, on stuttering. And it'll be the first study of its kind, with the idea being that there is this like what mushrooms seem to do is that uh, they 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 destabilize a lot of the networks that are required for speech communication, to put it very sort of loosely. And then psilocybin in particular has been shown to be helpful for some people, in sort of like remodulating these areas, and in particular for things like um, anxiety or depression, PTSD, where we're seeing that this particular network in the brain, called the default mode network, which is actually only supposed to be active, or only is active during rest, is that it's hyper sort of stimulated. And so the idea would be to lessen the activation, particularly within this network. We're obviously still at the beginning stages of this, but this is taking some of our prior work and like trying to figure out, okay, well then how can we modulate these neural networks in order to make speaking easier, right? It's not like the goal is obvious, in conjunction with therapy, with the idea that, okay, well, if we can sort of modulate this excessive cognitive or neural response, then perhaps we can make it easier for stutterers to focus on the things that they want to stutter on during these moments. So yeah, so I'll I'll stop there. I would love to talk about this for a little bit more, or answer any questions if anybody has.
Um, just from me again, Eric, and sorry, I don't mean to hog the questions or anything, but Just in terms of the psilocybin, am I saying that right? Or
Yeah,
magic
psilocybin.
mushrooms, to give it a street name. Just in terms of that reset, it just sort of prompts me to ask about brain plasticity. And have you ever worked on any method to get the brain to rewire in some sense, when trying to speak, to find a different route around the brain to speak, which might work better, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, no. So actually, one of the effects of psilocybin is that it does promote neuroplastic changes, right? And it makes the brain more amenable to change. Like, and if you think of stuttering, right? Like stuttering itself is not a habit or is not habitual, but a lot of the things that we do in response to stuttering are kind of habit-like, right?
Yeah.
Particularly things like avoidances, and they become deep ingrained, particularly because we often learn them in early childhood. So like some of the thinking, specifically with psilocybin, is that okay, well, no, maybe it can promote some kind of neuroplasticity, where like uh, it can help with this sort of rewiring of the brain, helping a person be sort of more objective during a stuttering moment instead of their mind being clouded with sort of all of the negative, like maladaptive responses that we've sort of accumulated over the years. Now, that said, right, like the only uh, studies that so far that have looked at um, what's going on in the brain with stuttering therapy have been exclusively fluency shaping, like only speech behavioral uh, interventions, right? So I mean, I'm sure, I don't know exactly what they would be, but I'm sure that if uh, if the therapies and studies focused on things like non-avoidance, acceptance of yourself as a person who stutters, stuttering modification therapy,
Mm.
I'm sure that those would, of course, change the brain too, in the sense that they've helped
Yeah.
people in so many other ways, right? We just
Yeah.
haven't done them yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
I mean, probably would be longer lasting. Like given that those types of therapies target self-concept, right? Particularly things like acceptance, right? Regardless of whether, again, a person then starts to uh, openly stutter more, or if they like would like to use some sort of speaking strategy, whatever they want to do, it just becomes easier with that type of work, which is why I say I think that they like uh, plasticity that occurs after those kinds of therapies. I mean, I would think that it would probably be longer lasting, but we don't know yet because not enough researchers are studying it.
Okay.
I mean, none are. So anyway.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, of course you can, Bridget. Yeah.
Thank you. You know how like say that like the heightened neural activity that it obviously like peaks at like say a certain stage, like and then it obviously like say dips down that like is there say a specific stage that like it say like peaks or like what sort of triggers the transition from like say like stuttering and like say like blocking into fluency again, if that makes any sense.
So, so thanks for the question, Bridget. Let me make sure that I understand. What you're asking is like, what is happening in the brain, um, or what's going on in the transition between stuttered and fluent speech? Like essentially what happens
Yeah.
in the brain when a person stutters?
Or it's sort of just like at what stage does the heightened neural activity peak and then transitions back into fluency. So like kind of like that stage.
Right. No. So, okay, got it. So what we've studied in these two studies that I showed briefly before was during the anticipatory period, right? So in one of the studies, we had a 5 second window prior to the prior to speech execution, right? So the participants were asked a question, and then at the end of the question, the 5 second period started, and then they had to say the word 5 seconds later after they were given a cue. And the response that we identified was during that time window, but particularly starting approximately at the end of the question, right? In the other study, we had it was a much shorter time window that we were analyzing, where participants saw a word on a screen, then there was a delay period, and then they got a signal a second before they had to produce the word, and then they were given a signal to produce the word. And the response that we measured there was from that 1 second warning. Like, so those were the time windows that we were looking at in this study. Now, we like again, we don't necessarily, or no, we don't think that the neural activity that we're identifying is the stuttering glitch itself. Rather, it seems to be that it's some kind of like cognitive response that's related to anticipation. In exactly what way, we're still trying to figure that out, if that makes sense.
Eric, can I ask you a question? Just in relation to, because I know you had just said previously about just there's a lot of the brain studies, but they've been just focused on whether it's the kind of fluency side of things or so on. Do you think with the rise in researchers like that are maybe focusing on the acceptance and spontaneity and joy of stuttering, do you think that there might be more kind of brain studies that might focus on that side of things rather than the fluencies?
Yeah, no, I hope so. The thing is that like the people that do neuroscience in this world are typically not the type of people like us who necessarily think that spontaneity is more important than fluency. If that makes sense. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not a political response, but like
Yeah.
like like the quote good scientists out there doing brain imaging research in stuttering are often not clinicians. They're definitely not working with people who stutter anymore, if they ever even were clinicians. Um, some of some of us are stutterers. I think that that helps in some way, but there's definitely a disconnect. So, like what I and some other people try are trying to do is sort of bridge these like disparate worlds, right? Where it is kind of like the basic science side of things, which is very separate in a lot of ways, at least theoretically, from the kind of experience and even like clinical or therapeutic side.
Cool, cool.
Yeah.
And sorry, just my last question is, so from your experience from being attending the likes of Friends and seeing the kind of younger kids that are coming through now, has that shaped how you look at your own research also? So from the kids that you met on like the likes of conference.
Does do the kids who I'm working with inform my own research? Is that the
Yeah,
question?
yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, of course.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. I mean, um, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
definitely. Like one of the nice things about like being involved in certainly in organizations like Friends, but then also continuing to, albeit in a small capacity, work as a therapist is that I am like I don't forget about the stuttering experience, right? And I'm not so removed from the stuttering experience, which I think a lot of scientists who are studying stuttering might be.
Cool. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
I know we're probably coming up close to the time, but I know there's probably some people that didn't have a chance to talk. So, is there anyone that like has a question for Eric that maybe you would like?
Oh, I didn't see these. Oh, okay. I didn't see these in the chat.
Oh yeah, I'll have a look at the chat. Please do anything in there.
No, there are no
No, just
questions
Mary.
there. It just buys.
Cool, cool. Okay, so I think if we're happy enough, we can maybe kind of wrap things up. I would just like to take this opportunity from myself and the Irish Stammering Association to thank Eric for just giving up his time to join us here. And Eric, is there anything that you would like to close with? Or
No.
no?
I mean, I appreciate the opportunity and thanks for asking me to.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So if it's okay with everybody, can I just take a quick picture just for just our kind of social media? Okay. Yeah. Cool. I'll take it on three, so everyone will shout. That's what else there. 1, 2, 3. Cool. Cheers, lads. So yeah, and if everyone wants to, like, you will get the chance to look back on this episode of the speaker series. If you just go to the Irish Stammering Association's website. So, thank you everyone for joining us here.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thanks again.
Cool.
Thanks very much, Eric.
All right. Thanks. Thanks. Take care. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, Deletta. Nice to see you again.